Arise and seize the moment. Ride on the wings of change. Quietly unleash the power of positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices.
Good evening. This is Positive Choices, and I'm MT Love. Tonight, we're going to talk about Juneteenth, and my guest is Thelma Ruffin-Thomas. Miss Thomas?
My name is Thelma Ruffin-Thomas, just to let you know. I'm a storytelling woman going fast, not slow. So you better pay attention to this story of mine. If you can't keep up, you'll be left behind. My name is Thelma Ruffin-Thomas, and I'm here this evening to share my story about Juneteenth. Children, I come back today to tell you the story of the long, dark way that I had to climb, that I had to know in order that my race might live and grow. Now, many of you have heard of how President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on September 2nd, 1862, notifying the states in rebellion against the Union that if they did not cease their rebellion and return to the Union by January 1st, 1863, he would declare their slaves forever free. The proclamation did not apply to those slave-holding states that had not rebelled against the Union. As a result, 800,000 of my sisters and brothers were unaffected by the provisions of the proclamation. It would take a civil war to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation, and it would take the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution to formally outlaw slavery in the United States. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. In fact, President Lincoln was not the first to issue an Emancipation Proclamation. General John Fremont, with General David Hunter, issued an Emancipation Proclamation to free slaves in their military districts. However, they were overruled by President Lincoln, who feared that the slaveholding states, such as Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland, might join the Confederacy. Lincoln was eventually pressured politically and militarily into taking a stronger stand. As a result, he submitted the Emancipation Proclamation to Congress on September 2nd, 1862. During the Civil War, few battles were fought in Texas. Federal troops did not penetrate the state interior. As word circulated through the Confederacy that slavery in Texas was affected very little during the war, slave owners from Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri sent their slaves westward to Texas. The Emancipation Proclamation was suppressed in Texas. Later attempts to explain this 2.5-year delay in the receipt of this important news have yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And still another is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. All or none of them could be true. For whatever reason, conditions in Texas remain status quo, well beyond what was statutory. I am the child they stole from the sand 300 years ago in Africa's land. I am the dark girl who crossed the wide sea, carrying in my body the seed of the free. I am the woman who worked in the field, bringing the cotton and the corn to yield. I am the one who labored as a slave, beaten and mistreated for the work that I gave. Children sold away from me, husbands sold too. No safety, no love, no respect was I due. 300 years in the deepest South. Juneteenth is celebrated publicly and in the privacy of homes. The holiday is known for its barbecues, baseball, games, rodeos, and parades. Milwaukee, Wisconsin boasts one of the largest celebrations in the United States, with more than 100,000 people attending. Other cities, such as Kansas City, Los Angeles, and Houston, draw huge crowds as well. A range of activities are provided to entertain the people who show up at these festivities. Rodeos, fishing, baseball are just a few of the typical Juneteenth activities you may witness today. Juneteenth almost always focuses on education and self-improvement. Thus, often guest speakers are brought in, and the elders are called upon to recount the events of the past. Prayer services were also a major part of these celebrations. Certain foods became popular and synonymous with Juneteenth celebrations, such as strawberry soda pop. More traditional and just as popular was, as I said before, the barbecuing, through which Juneteenth participants could share in the spirit and aromas that their ancestors, the newly emancipated African Americans, would have experienced during their ceremonies. Hence, the barbecue pit is often established as the center of attention at Juneteenth celebrations. Food was abundant because everyone prepared a special dish. Meats such as lamb, pork, and beef, which were not available every day during the time that they were enslaved, were bought for this celebration. A true Juneteenth celebration left visitors well satisfied and with enough conversations to last until the next. Dress was also an important element in early Juneteenth customs and is often taken quite seriously, particularly by the direct descendants who can make the connection to this traditional root. During slavery, there were laws on the books in many areas that prohibited or limited the dressing of the enslaved. During the initial days of the Emancipation celebrations, there are accounts of former slaves tossing their ragged garments into creeks and rivers to adorn clothing taken from the plantations belonging to their former masters. In the early years, little interest existed outside the African American community in participation in the celebrations. In some cases, there was outwardly exhibited resistance by barring the use of public property for the festivities. Most of the festivities found themselves out in rural areas around rivers and creeks that could provide for additional activities such as fishing, horseback riding, and barbecues. Often the church grounds were the site for such activities. Eventually, as African Americans became landowners, land was donated and dedicated for these festivities. One of the earliest documented land purchases in the name of Juneteenth was organized by Reverend Jack Yates. This fundraising effort yielded $1,000 and the purchase of Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas. In Mexia, the local Juneteenth organization purchased Booker T. Washington Park, which had become the Juneteenth celebrations site in 1898. There are accounts of Juneteenth activities being interrupted and halted by white landowners demanding that their laborers return to work. However, it seems most allowed their workers the day off, and some even made donations of food and money. For decades, these annual celebrations flourished, growing continuously with each passing year. In Booker T. Washington Park, as many as 20,000 African Americans once flowed through during the course of a week, making the celebration one of the state's largest. Economic and cultural forces provided for a decline in Juneteenth activities and participants beginning in the early 1900s. Classroom and textbook education in lieu of traditional home and family-taught practices stifled the interest of the youth due to less emphasis and detail on the activities of former slaves. Classroom textbooks proclaimed Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, as the date signaling the end of slavery, and little or nothing on the impact of General Graver's arrival on June 19th. The Depression forced many peoples off the farms and into the cities to find work. In these urban environments, employers were less eager to grant leaves to celebrate this date. Thus, unless June 19th fell on a weekend or holiday, there were very few participants available to celebrate this day. July 4th was the already established Independence Day, and a rise in patriotism steered more toward this celebration. On June 1st, 1980, June 10th became an official state holiday through the efforts of Al Edwards, an African-American state legislator. The first emancipation celebration granted official state recognition. Representative Edwards has since actively sought to spread the observance of Juneteenth all across America. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Juneteenth has continued to enjoy a growing and healthy interest from communities and organizations throughout the country. Institutions such as the Smithsonian, the Henry Ford Museum, and others have been sponsoring Juneteenth-centered activities. In recent years, a number of national Juneteenth organizations have arisen to take their place alongside older organizations, all with the mission to promote and cultivate knowledge and appreciation of African American history and culture. Someone asked the question, Thelma, why do you tell? When you share your many stories, do the people listen well? Someone may be wondering, are the stories true? If you feel them in your heart, then the story's true for you. I tell because I'm happy, I tell because I'm free, free to share the stories that mean so much to me. Now you can go online and look up to see what else they have about Juneteenth and research it for yourself. I'd like to share a story about how the community is responsible for the health of our young people and our elders. And this was written by one of my favorite poets and author, Langston Hughes. She was a large woman, and she carried a large purse that had everything in it but hammer and nails. It had a long strap, and she carried it slung over her shoulder. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and she was coming home from work alone. when a boy ran up behind her and tried to snatch her purse. The strap broke with the first tug. The boy gave it, but the boy's weight and the weight of the purse combined caused him to fall on his back right on the sidewalk. So instead of taking off as he had thought, he fell on his back. The large woman turned around and picked the boy up by his shirt and shook him until his teeth rattled. "Pick up my pocketbook, boy, and give it to me." She still held him, but she bent down enough to permit him to pick up the purse. "Ain't you ashamed of yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." "What did you do it for?" "I didn't aim to." By that time, 2 or 3 people passed and stopped to look. And they stood watching for a while and then went on their way. "If I turn you loose, will you run?" said the woman. "Yes, ma'am." "Then I won't turn you loose," she said. Your face is dirty. Don't you have somebody at home who can tell you to wash your face?" "No, ma'am," he said. "Then it will get washed this evening." The large woman started up the street, dragging the frightened boy behind her. He was about 14 or 15, wearing tennis shoes and blue jeans. "You ought to be my son," she said. "I'd teach you right from wrong. Are you hungry?" "No, ma'am. I just want you to turn me loose." "Was I bothering you when I turned that corner?" "No, ma'am. But you put yourself in contact with me. Now, if you think that contact is going to last a short while, you better get it in your head, young man, that you're going to remember Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones." Sweat popped out on the boy's head, and he began to struggle. Miss Jones stopped, jerked him around in front of him, and put a half Nelson about his neck, and continued dragging the boy up the street until she got to her door. She went down a hall and into a large kitchenette furnished room at the rear of the house. She switched on the light and left the door open. "What is your name?" "Roger." "Roger, go to that sink and wash your face. Let the water run until it's warm. Here's a clean towel." "You going to take me to jail?" "I wouldn't take you nowhere with that dirty face. Here I'm trying to get home to cook me something to eat, and you snatch my pocketbook. Maybe you ain't been home to your supper either, late as it be. Have you?" "There's nobody home in my house." "Then we'll eat. I believe you're hungry or been hungry to try to snatch my purse." "I wanted a pair of blue suede shoes," said the boy. "Well, you didn't have to snatch my pocketbook to get some blue suede shoes," said Miss Luella Bates Washington Jones. "Why didn't you just ask me?" "Ma'am," the boy said, the water dripping from his face. He looked at that woman, and after he had dried his face, he turned around wondering what to do next. He could make a dash for the door. The door was open. He could run. The woman was sitting on the daybed, and after a while she said, "I was young once, and I wanted things I could not get." You thought I was going to say I didn't snatch anybody's pocketbook. I've done things, son, that nobody knows about, but maybe God does. Well, let me get up here and fix us something to eat. In another corner of the room, behind a big screen, was a gas plate and an icebox. Miss Jones got up and went behind the screen. The woman did not watch the boy to see if he was going to run now, and she did not watch her purse, which she had left behind on the daybed. But the boy took care to sit on the far side of the room, where she could easily see him out of the corner of her eye. He did not trust the woman not to trust him, and he did not want to be mistrusted now. She heated up some lima beans and ham hocks, made some cocoa, and set the table. The woman did not ask the boy anything about where he lived or his folks or anything that would embarrass him. Instead, as they ate, she told him about her job. She worked in a hotel beauty shop, which stayed open late. Then she cut him a half of her 10-cent cake and said, "Eat some more, son." When they were finished eating, she got up and said, "Here, take this money and buy yourself some blue suede shoes. And next time, do not make the mistake of latching on to my pocketbook or anybody else's pocketbook, because shoes come by devilish like that will burn your feet. I got to get my rest now, but I wish you would behave yourself from here on in." She led him down the hall to the front door and opened it. "Good night. Behave yourself, Roger." The boy wanted to say something else other than "Thank you, ma'am," to Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones. But he couldn't do so as he turned at the barren stoop and looked back at the large woman. He barely managed to say "thank you" before she shut the door. And he never saw her again. Come quickly, gather round and listen to a story. S-T-O-R-Y, 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 and listen to a story. Another one of Langston Hughes's poems. But before I tell you that, I lived down the street from Langston Hughes when I was growing up. I lived at 75 East 127th Street between Park and Madison. And I found out in 1994, there was an article in the paper that Langston had purchased a house on 127th Street between 5th and Madison, a brownstone. And I wrote to the person that was named in the article, because they gave the address, and asked if I and my group, the African Folk Heritage Circle, could come and tell stories, because they, in the article, it indicated that the place was used for different events. And we went there in February, because February is my birthday month, and it also is Langston Hughes' birthday month. And we went there, and we had a celebration of Langston Hughes material. And I think we went back another time, and they had the typewriter that Langston Hughes typed on for his many stories and poems, and a piano, and also a picture of him that was painted on the wall of the living room, or the parlor as they called it. And so I have a very close affection for him and his work. I was telling my brother about it, and he said, "Oh, I know Langston Hughes. Me and my friend Bugsy used to go down, and he used to tell us stories." And I said, "Why didn't you tell me about it?" And he just rolled his eyes. And so that was my other connection, that my brother also sat on the stoop there while Langston told stories to him and other children. I'd just like to leave this with you, another Langston Hughes, mother to son. "Well, son, I tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stairs. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I've been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps, because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I'm still going, honey. I'm still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair." And so I hope that you have learned something from my short story on Juneteenth. And June 16th, that's coming up, and the 19th is the official day, but it's during the week. So if there are any Juneteenth celebrations in your neighborhood, I would go and encourage you to go and see them. And just remember, my name is Thelma Ruffin-Thomas, just to let you know. I'm a storytelling woman going fast, not slow. Thank you.
Hallelujah, it's done. I believe on this son. I am saved.
The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor.
Historically, blacks were not free with any kind of communication from the government until June 19th.
Juneteenth is the day in which enslaved individuals in Texas learned that they were free.
Juneteenth is a day to pause and to reflect and to really assess where we are.
When the announcement was made, the slaves began right away to celebrate it and being thankful to God for being free.
There was a time when we were not free to do what we wanted to do, couldn't go and come, families were destroyed and broken up.
I think there's a lot of confusion today amongst the younger generation about what Juneteenth is and who celebrates Juneteenth.
Every year on June 19th, African Americans in Texas gather to celebrate the Juneteenth holiday. The 19th of June is a special day, a day representing freedom from slavery. It all began in 1865 when Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas. There, Granger stood outside Ashton Villa and announced that the Civil War had ended and that the enslaved were now free. This was 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation. Granger's general order would finally free the last 250,000 slaves whose bondage had been essentially unaffected by Lincoln's proclamation.
Galveston was a very important place. It was like New York City. Galveston was a metropolis.
Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, as important as it was then, and in some ways it's become even more important as a statement of the United States since that time, it really was symbolic in many ways, because when he issued it in January 1863, it did not go into effect. In other words, the South or the Confederates did not free their slaves at that time.
It had little effect in Texas because communication got there kind of slow. There were no federal troops in this part of the nation, so there was nobody to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation.
The issue here in Texas is that the Union Army was not in control, and slaves were not fools, and they were not suicidal.
This is MT Love. Thank you for watching my show today. And also, I want to remind you that there's going to be a street fair July 28th at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. That's 1891 McGraw Avenue. It's all about having fun, and so please try to attend.
Of positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices. Positive voices on positive choices.